You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is HARDtalk with me, Stephen Sacker. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. Welcome to HARDtalk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today has the unwanted privilege of being one of the most heavily protected women in France. Zineb ElRhazoui, a Moroccan-French journalist, wife and mother, has been subjected to a multitude of death threats over the last decade because of her determination to speak out against what she sees as the malign and dangerous influence of Islam. In 2015, she was one of the journalists working for the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, targeted for death by the two jihadists who stormed the magazine's Paris office. Luckily for her, she happened to be on holiday on that fateful day. Since then, she has become even more outspoken in her condemnation of what she calls Islamic fascism. She's been lauded for her bravery by leading French politicians and pilloried by many Muslim scholars and campaigners against Islamophobia. Her story is one of deep personal pain and never-ending public controversy. What motivates her to wage a war of words against the religion with which she was raised? Well, Zineb ElRhazoui joins me now. Welcome to HARDtalk.
Thank you.
There are words that seem to me to define your life. They are words like fight, struggle, resistance. How long do you feel that these words have been at the center of your life?
You know, as a Muslim-born woman, I realized very early in my life that I have to struggle against injustice and inequalities because I grew up in Morocco, and in Morocco, when you start to understand things, you realize very fast that you don't have the same rights as men. Even men don't have many rights in a country ruled at the time but by a totalitarian king and also by religious law. So as a woman, I only had two choices: either accept and disappear as a human being and feel destroyed, feel that I am no longer living, or struggle and refuse to be half a citizen.
But that isn't necessarily a choice that a lot of girls, young women, females feel to be their reality in a country like Morocco today. I mean, a lot of women probably wouldn't frame their lives as a choice between disappearing and struggle and resistance. So why were you different from so many of your peers back home in Morocco?
Maybe these women did not have the tools, maybe they did not have the courage. I don't know why I was different, but for me it is a question of dignity. And I've never considered myself as inferior to men. I just wanted to be normal, to say what I think, to have a normal life, to enjoy rights and freedom. That's what it is. And for that simple thing, you need, unfortunately, to struggle and to make war.
Make war?
Yeah.
You really feel that?
Yeah,
and you
of
felt
course.
that, actually, in a way, it's easy to define your life by this transformational moment that came on January 7, 2015, when the magazine that you worked for was attacked by two jihadists who ended up murdering a dozen people. But maybe it would be wrong to say that was a transformational moment. Maybe you felt you were in a war even before that happened.
Yeah, of course. I had a first fatwa against me in 2009 in Morocco because with a group of activists, with secular activists in Morocco, we decided to organize a public picnic during Ramadan because in the civil code in Morocco, in the penal code, it's punished by jail if you eat publicly during Ramadan. And we consider these laws as archaic, as violating human rights and freedoms. And so we just decided to protest with sandwiches. And I deserved a fatwa for that.
But there's something so interesting about the symbolism of you going out with your sandwiches to eat in a public space in Morocco, because surely you knew that that would offend so many of your fellow citizens in, I'm taking it was in Casablanca. You know, why did you feel it was okay and indeed necessary to offend so many other people?
I'm not obliging others to eat, but I want to be free to eat. I want to be free to exist as a Moroccan citizen who doesn't necessarily respect and follow this Islamic rule. So if they are offended, that's their problem. But me, I believe that sometimes provocation is necessary to impose a debate, to make people debate about things that are taboo in a society.
And we'll get to the debate, the ideology and the taboos later, but I just want to stick for the moment with the impact of these events on your life and your emotional life in particular. So here we have a young woman who is used to being in trouble. You are familiar with the notion of fatwa. You have been arrested and detained by the Moroccan authorities. You decide to leave Morocco after the uprisings of 2011 and the political turmoil. You end up in France. You get a job on Charlie Hebdo, the most famous satirical, provocative magazine in the country. Were you, therefore, perhaps not as shocked and surprised as so many of us were by the attack on the magazine's offices? Was it something that you were half expecting?
Yeah, we were half expecting that, but we never imagined that it will be as violent as that. And Charb was, as we say in French, Arabophile. He loved Arab language and Arab culture, and his war cry was always to say Allahu Akbar, to joke with that. And we were telling him, Charb, stop saying Allahu Akbar, because one day they will come and kill you, and we will not know if it's a joke, if they say Allahu Akbar. And that's exactly what happened.
We should be clear, for those who don't know the story, you survived precisely because you were actually on holiday on January 7, 2015. You were in Morocco, and your colleagues and dear friends, particularly Charbonnier, who was your mentor, your collaborator, he was one of those gunned down and killed.
Exactly. I was supposed to be there that day. I was working, actually. I was in Morocco, but I woke up that day and I sent my suggestion for the article I write. It was about ISIS State, by the way. I sent an email to Charb telling him that's what I want to do that week, and I was just waiting for the answer. And I got a phone call telling me, where are you? Are you in Charlie Hebdo? Because there is fire shootings there, and that's how I learned that they were killed.
I need to ask you about the feelings you've had since then, how you've processed it, because of course it's a long time now, it's years, but you were one of the people we know the jihadists wanted to kill. You were on their list along with Charb and a few others. You and Charb had collaborated on a book that they particularly disliked. And yet some people who died were not writing about Islam at all. Some of them weren't even editorial staff. Do you feel guilty that you were producing work that was the cause of these jihadist, violent people to go to that office, and yet others died who were not anything to do with the cause, and you survived?
Of course. When such a violent event happens, you are in a post-trauma situation, and just as if you survived a plane crash, you feel guilty because you survived and all those people died. I felt guilty during months and months.
Did you also have a sense of responsibility?
No, because I understand after that the only guilty people for that crime were the terrorists. They were the Kouachi brothers. And I think it's a big mistake to look for the reasons of the crime in the victims. Many people now, every time you have a terrorist attack, many people try to say, oh, it's because of the foreign policy of the country, it's because of racism, it's because of non-integration, etc. But actually, the guilty people are not the victims. The only guilt I find is the ideology of the killers.
So that book I referred to, the comic book, The Life of Muhammad, that you worked on with Charb, looking back on it now, you would change nothing. You would have published that book just the same today, knowing what you know now, as you did back in 2013.
you know, when we published that book at the time, we knew that that we were threatened. And actually, that book was published after the cocktail Molotov attack on Charlie Hebdo in November 2011. So we knew that there is a taboo. But our duty as journalists is to break the taboos in the society. This is exactly our job. And for us, as a French satirical newspaper, the right to so-called blasphemy, the right to criticize religions and to not necessarily criticize them, but only discuss them and debate about religion is exactly what draws the limit between civilization and barbarism.
Interesting you use that word duty in your answer there. It seems to me, reading what you've said and written about your feelings after the Charlie Hebdo attack, you feel a strong sense of duty now to not only keep up the struggle, but intensify the struggle and your writings and your words taking on Islam. It seems that obligation lives in you now more than before.
Of course, because as you said in your presentation, it is a question of death or life. It is not a superficial question in our societies now. Islamic terrorism is killing people around the world, in the West, but also in Africa, also in Muslim countries. So we need to fight that fundamentalism, fight that ideology on an ideological level.
But there are also obligations you have to live a life that is tolerable not just for you but those you love. And when you say that, you know, ISIS continues to issue threats against you which essentially revolve around separating your head from your body, that impacts your child. You have a child. It impacts your husband. It impacts all of your family. And it would be entirely legitimate for you to take a step back and say, I have to live a life, not just be a warrior in a struggle.
How do you want me to give up? My friends and those who were struggling with me were killed. I cannot just say I'm lucky to live and keep silent. When we keep silent, actually we put in danger those who talk. So if we are numerous, if all of us talk, if all the media in the world published the cartoons in 2006 by solidarity with Charlie Hebdo, what would they have done? Would they kill all of us?
But without wishing to state the obvious, I mean, this isn't just about you. I mean, you've had a child. You are also a daughter. You have parents.
Let me tell you something. When the 14th of July, when this terrorist attack happened in Nice, and when you had a lot of babies who were watching fire plays who were killed, actually those babies, those families, they were not threatened. They were not targeted. I am. And I have a security. They hadn't, but they were killed and I'm still alive. I am okay. I am personally targeted, but it's our civilization that is targeted. That is what I believe. It's our style of living that is targeted.
Do your family all support the stand you continue to take? Some of them still, of course, in Morocco.
Yeah, most of my family still lives in Morocco. Actually, yes, they support me.
All of them?
Most of them support me. I have a lot of friends who are believers, who worship God, who don't necessarily agree with me, but we still respect each other in a human level, and we're still friends, and we still see each other and find pleasure to meet each other.
But interestingly, some people who come to this argument about Islam and violence from a somewhat similar place to you do believe that you've gone too far. I mean, I'm thinking of Olivier Siron, for example, a former Charlie Hebdo journalist himself, who says that you and others on Charlie Hebdo just went too far developing this, what he calls Islamophobic neurosis that gradually took over and ended up endorsing attacks on members of a minority religion with no influence in the corridors of power. His message basically, you went too far.
Yeah, actually, Olivier Serran, when he published this tribune, it was a few years ago. It was before the terrorist attacks. And he was giving examples of what he considered as proofs that Charlie Hebdo is so-called Islamophobic. And I don't agree with this term, by the way. I'm going to talk about it later. And Olivier Serran was quoting my articles without saying who is the author, because maybe it will be strange if you accuse an article of being racist and if you say that the author is a Muslim born and has an Arab name. And
but surely you're not arguing that because you're Muslim you are necessarily immune from the accusation that some of what you write is Islamophobic and inciting of hate against Muslims, because you could be a Muslim and still be responsible for incitement.
I don't accept the word of Islamophobia. For me, it's an intellectual imposture. For me, if you are Muslim born, if you are Christian born, Jewish born, you have the right to criticize ideas, and religions are ideas. I was Muslim born. I was ruled by Islamic law. So why am I not allowed to criticize that law? And there is a big difference between criticizing ideas and criticizing people. Let me give you an example. As a feminist, for instance, I am against the veil. I don't like the veil. For me, it's a sexist costume. But it doesn't mean that I hate individually every veiled woman and that I deny her rights as a human being. There is a huge difference between criticizing ideas and criticizing people.
But well, you make it sound so simple, but it's actually kind of complicated to unpick the two parts of that. And let me quote, rather than me tell you, let me quote you words that seem to me quite relevant from Timothy Winter, who changed his name because he converted to Islam. He became Abdul Hakim Murad. He works at Cambridge University, a director of religious studies at Wolfson College. He's a well-respected thinker, and he says this, he said, scorning the prophet in the way that he sees yours and some other writings. He says, scorning the prophet goes beyond free speech. It is an act of violence. And he compares it with the days of Nazi terror when cartoons supplied a key weapon of anti-Jewish polemic. He's making a direct comparison there. Are you not guilty of that kind of incitement? Particularly, may I say, with the book that you published, which essentially, its title is clear, To Destroy Islamic Fascism.
Yeah. Because I talk about an ideology in that book. And for me, cartooning the prophet is not something different than cartooning the Pope, any chief of state, Jesus, Moses, or God himself.
But Zineb, it's not just cartoons. Quote you, I think from this book directly, Islam is not a religion of peace and love, but an ideology that teaches hate of the other and which blesses the inferiority of women and non-Muslims. You are essentially condemning as fascist an entire religion.
Do you know any religion of peace and love? Do you imagine now, if we apply Christianism by letter in the society, divorce would be forbidden, women would have less rights, etc., etc.
But you're not couching this as an argument against religion. You're couching it as an argument against what you call the fascism of Islam.
Of course. Today, Islam is applied by the terrorists as a fascist ideology, as something you can compare to a genocidal ideology. This ideology is committing crimes. It is killing, and no matter who they kill, the most important is killing a maximum of people. Of course, this ideology, you can compare it to fascism. There is a lot of characteristics that are very close to what you find in all other fascisms.
Do you not see that when you call Islam a brand of fascism, you are aiding and abetting those who right now on the streets of European cities are attacking Muslims simply because they're Muslim? You're giving them some sort of intellectual justification. And we know from the figures that in France, Germany, the UK, the number of attacks on Muslims is rising exponentially.
Islam, we should first define it. Are we talking about Islamic civilization, about Islam with a capital I, which defines the territories where this civilization spread and includes music, costumes, etc.? Or are we talking about what is written in the Islamic texts, the fact of praying 5 times a day, etc.? If we're talking about the religion, this religion is a way of worshipping written by, in a Bedouin culture 15 centuries ago. Are we really keen now to apply it as something ruling the society in 2017? Of course, Islam doesn't respect equality between men and women. I am asking now for a society where we apply human rights rules. If Islam is a private spirituality, if any religion is a spirituality and it stays at home, if religion helps someone to become someone better, religion is welcome in that case. But no religion, neither Islam nor Christianism, can rule the society a democratic way.
Who are you trying to persuade of your message with the way you present your ideas? You know, because it seems to me it's very unlikely you're going to persuade, quote unquote, moderate Muslims of your case when you begin by saying that you associate Islam with fascism.
People who live in Muslim countries ruled by Islam, they know that our far-right wing is the Islamists. In Europe, the far-right wing definitely don't share the same project of society with the Islamists, but they have the same dialectic tools.
But interestingly, you're now talking about Islamists, and at other times you just talk about Islamic terror in the same way that Donald Trump does. You know, is it a particular problem with some quote-unquote fundamentalist Islamist factions at one far end of the Muslim religion, or is it a problem with the religion itself?
For me, the Islamists are those who see Islam as a political project, while the Muslims, who can define who are they? If the Muslims are a community, as many people pretend in Europe, so I belong to that community, isn't it? For me, Muslims are not a community. They are individuals. They are citizens. They have the right to define themselves by other things than by religion.
A final thought, Zineb, if I may, and I want to take you back to the beginning and you telling me that from being a young woman in Morocco, you have always felt this absolute need to resist and to struggle and, to use your word, to fight a war. That fighting of the war has ended up with you living in a sort of metaphorical cage with security guards, secret locations, having to move time and again to make sure nobody knows your routine. Is it worth it?
I think of the Muslim people, those who were born in Muslim countries, who don't have the right to drink a beer, who don't have the right to have a love story, who don't have the right to produce a movie with a kissing scene, who don't have the simple rights the people enjoy here in the West. Those people actually live in a jail, and they don't have a choice but struggling against this ideology. And I don't understand this leftist Europe, born with all these rights, who have this kind of complaisance toward what they think are the Muslims, and who think that we are people condemned to be ruled by our traditions. No, in the Muslim world, you have people who deserve the same universal right as you. And this is my struggle. And anyway, if I leave me in a moving jail, I consider that inside my head, I am much more free than those who threaten me.
Zineb, ElRhazoui, we have to end there, but thank you for being on Hard Talk.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Zineb. Thank you very much indeed.
That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Sackur. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.